Abeni Adesina was 33 years old, married for 7 years, and living in Ibadan, Nigeria. On paper, her life looked fine. She had a good husband, a decent home, and people who smiled at her in public. But there was one thing everyone noticed first. She had no child yet. And in her family, that single fact followed her everywhere like a shadow. The naming ceremony was held at Agodi Gardens, one of those places that looks perfect in pictures. White canopies, gold chairs, soft music, and people dressed in expensive lace. The family had gone all out. As Abeni stepped out of the car, she took a deep breath. She had dressed carefully, choosing a simple but elegant outfit. She wanted to look calm, confident, unbothered, even if she wasn't. She smiled as she greeted relatives, but her eyes stayed alert. She knew how these events usually went. The long hugs that lasted a bit too long. The side glances. The fake concern wrapped in sweet words like, "Your time will come." Then there was Sada Desina, her sister-in-law. Loud, confident, always at the center of attention. People loved Saad. She laughed easily, talked boldly, and moved like the world was her stage. Today was no different. Saad was everywhere, directing people, joking loudly, soaking in admiration like sunlight. Abeni found her seat and sat quietly, hands folded on her lap. She wanted to enjoy the celebration. She really did. But deep inside, she knew this was not a place where she was expected to smile too much, or at all. The music was still playing softly when the speeches started. People were relaxed, eating, laughing, enjoying the afternoon. Then Saad stood up and reached for the microphone. No one was surprised. Saad always loved moments like this. The crowd welcomed her with smiles and small cheers. She cleared her throat, laughing like she was about to say something funny. She started by praising the family and the baby. People nodded along. Then her tone changed slightly, playful but sharp at the same time. She smiled wide and said, "You know, in every family, some women give beautiful gifts." She paused, letting the suspense hang in the air. "And some," she continued, laughing, "only give excuses." A few people laughed, not fully understanding yet. Saad tilted her head and added, "God didn't bless everyone with fruit." For a second, it felt like the entire garden froze. The music seemed to stop, even though it hadn't. Heads slowly turned, one by one, until almost every eye landed on Abeni. There was a short, uncomfortable silence. Then someone laughed. Then another. Soon, laughter spread across the tables, light and careless. Phones came out. People began recording, smiling like they had just witnessed a joke worth sharing. No one said Abeni's name. No one needed to. Abeni felt the words hit her chest like heat. Her ears rang. Her hands went cold. She kept her face still, but inside something cracked. She understood the message clearly. Barren. The word wasn't spoken, but it was screamed in front of everyone. She glanced at her husband, Kunnel. He avoided her eyes. Her mother-in-law smiled stiffly, pretending nothing was wrong. Some women looked at Abeni with pity. Others with curiosity, like she was a topic, not a person. Saad laughed again, clearly pleased with herself, and handed the microphone back like she had done nothing wrong. The music resumed. People went back to eating and chatting. But for Abeni, everything had changed. In that moment, her private pain had been turned into public entertainment, and the whole world was watching. Abeni smiled. Not the kind of smile that comes from happiness, but the careful one women learn when they are hurting and don't want to be questioned. Her lips curved gently, her head nodded slightly, as if nothing had happened. From the outside, she looked calm, composed, strong. But inside, she felt like she was falling apart piece by piece. She picked up her glass of water with steady hands, even though her fingers were trembling. Around her, conversations continued. Plates clinked. Laughter rose and fell like normal. It shocked her how quickly the moment passed for everyone else. One sentence had cut her deeply, yet the world moved on without slowing down. She looked at Kunnel again. He was right beside her, staring straight ahead, jaw tight. He didn't speak. He didn't laugh. But he didn't defend her either. That silence hurt almost as much as the joke. She wondered if he thought speaking up would make things worse, or if he was simply used to her swallowing pain quietly. Her mother-in-law leaned closer to someone else, fully focused on a different conversation. It was clear she had heard the comment. It was also clear she had chosen peace over truth. Abeni felt invisible, like her feelings were less important than keeping the family atmosphere pleasant. One aunt touched Abeni's arm softly and whispered, "Ignore it, my dear. Be patient. God sees everything." Another relative nodded in agreement, offering her a sad smile, as if patience was a medicine for public humiliation. Abeni nodded back, still smiling, still performing strength for people who would never carry her pain home with them. Inside her chest, something broke. Not because she didn't have a child, but because her struggle had been turned into a joke. Years of hospital visits, silent prayers, hope that rose and fell. All of it reduced to laughter and phone recordings. She realized then that what hurt most was not infertility. It was being laughed at, being exposed, being made small in front of people who claimed to be family. Ebony sat there smiling, bleeding quietly, and understanding for the first time that silence, when chosen by others, can be a very cruel thing. That night, Ebony sat alone on the edge of her bed in their house at Bodija Estate. The room was quiet, but her mind was loud. The events of the day replayed again and again, every word, every laugh, every face that had turned toward her. She didn't switch on the big light. The small lamp beside her bed was enough. Bright lights felt too honest. She took off her earrings slowly and placed them on the table. Her phone lay beside her, face down. Notifications kept coming in, missed calls, messages, forwarded videos. She didn't open any of them. She already knew what they contained. As the silence grew heavier, memories started coming back without permission. Hospital corridors that smelled like disinfectant. The way nurses spoke in gentle voices. Connell holding her hand during tests, then letting go when things became too hard to talk about. Prayers whispered in churches, mosques, and in the bathroom when no one could hear her. And the miscarriages, quiet losses she never announced, never posted, never explained. Pain she carried alone because explaining it felt even harder. Ebony didn't scream. She didn't throw anything. She didn't cry loudly. A single tear rolled down her face, then another, but she wiped them away quickly. She was tired of tears that changed nothing. She reached for a notebook from her drawer. It was an old one, half-used. She opened a blank page and picked up a pen. At first, her hand shook. Then she started writing. Not angrily, not emotionally, clearly. She wrote what had been said. Who had said it? Who had stayed silent? She wrote dates, moments, truths she had hidden for years. As she wrote, something shifted inside her. The pain didn't disappear, but it became focused. Sharp, controlled. Ebony leaned back and took a deep breath. She made a decision right there in that quiet room. She would not shout. She would not fight. She would not insult anyone back. That would only make her look like the problem. Instead, she would teach a lesson. A calm one. A truthful one. One that didn't rely on anger, but on facts. She closed the notebook gently, turned off the lamp, and lay back on the bed. For the first time that night, her heart felt steady. She had been wounded, but she was no longer lost. What most people didn't know about Ebony was that her silence was never weakness. It was a choice. For years, she stayed in the background, doing things quietly, without announcing herself or seeking praise. She believed good deeds didn't need an audience. She believed family was family, and help was help. When there were emergencies, Ebony was there. The time her uncle needed money for surgery, she sent it quietly. No group message, no thank you speech. When school fees became a problem for two younger cousins, she paid them in full and asked the school not to mention her name. People assumed things always worked out. They never knew it was Ebony making them work. Even Saad benefited from that quiet kindness. Years earlier, when Saada's husband's small business was struggling, Ebony stepped in. She didn't loan the money with conditions. She didn't remind them every month. She simply helped, trusting that family meant support, not repayment. When the business picked up later, Saad proudly told people it was hard work and grace. Ebony smiled and said nothing. She also owned property in Abeokuta, land she bought slowly, patiently, without noise. While others competed for attention, Ebony focused on stability. She saved. She planned. She built her life carefully, brick by brick. Yet in family gatherings, she was still seen as the woman without a child, as if that one thing erased everything else she was. Ebony could have spoken up many times. She could have reminded them who paid for. She could have corrected false stories. But she didn't. She chose peace over credit, silence over applause. She told herself that respect would come naturally one day. That day never came. Instead, her silence became a space others filled with their own stories, their own judgments. And when Saad mocked her in public, Ebony finally understood something important. Silence only protects you when it is respected. When it is not, it becomes permission. Now, silence was still her tool, but she would use it differently. Not to hide, not to endure, but to speak only when it mattered most. And when she finally spoke, the truth would be loud enough on its own. Months passed after the naming ceremony, and life slowly returned to its normal rhythm. The whispers faded, but Ebony never forgot. She healed quietly, focused on her work, her plans, and her peace. So when she heard that Saad was hosting a women's empowerment brunch in Lekki Phase 1, she wasn't surprised. Saad loved platforms, and this one came with influencers, cameras, and a lot of attention. What surprised people was Ebony's name on the guest list. On the day of the event, the venue was beautiful. Soft music, flower arrangements, branded backdrops, and women dressed to impress. Content creators moved around with phones and cameras, capturing smiles and sound bites. It was the kind of place where every word could end up online. Ebony arrived calmly. No drama, no entourage. She wore a simple, elegant dress and walked in with quiet confidence. Her face was relaxed. Her steps were steady. Anyone looking at her would never guess she was stepping into a space that once hurt her deeply. Some people noticed her immediately and whispered. Others stared in surprise. A few smiled awkwardly, unsure of how to act around her now. Sod noticed too. For just a second, her smile slipped, but she recovered quickly, greeting guests like the perfect host. Ebony took her seat near the front, listening as speakers talked about strength, womanhood, and confidence. The words floated through the room, polished and inspiring. She nodded occasionally, not because the words were new to her, but because she understood them deeply. When refreshments were served, cameras flashed. Influencers laughed into microphones, sharing stories about resilience and self-worth. Everything felt rehearsed. Perfect. Safe. No one expected Ebony to be there, and no one expected her to stay. Some assumed she came for closure. Others thought she was trying to prove something. But Ebony sat peacefully, hands resting on her lap, eyes clear, heart steady. She wasn't there to cause a scene. She wasn't there to interrupt. She had not come to argue or embarrass anyone. She had come because sometimes the most powerful response is showing up, calm, prepared, and unafraid, right where you were once made to feel small. And as the program moved toward the open floor discussion, the room had no idea that quiet truth was about to take center stage. When it was her turn to speak, Ebony stood up slowly. The room quieted immediately. People noticed her presence in a way they hadn't before. Cameras swiveled, phones were raised, and whispers stopped. She held the microphone lightly, her hands steady, her posture calm. There was no anger in her voice, no trembling, just quiet confidence. "Thank you to the hosts for inviting me," she began, smiling politely. "It's an honor to be here among so many strong, inspiring women." Her eyes scanned the crowd, briefly meeting faces, lingering on a few familiar ones. She paused, letting the moment stretch. The pause wasn't awkward, it was intentional. People leaned in, curious. "I want to share a story," she continued, her tone soft but firm. "A story about dignity, about strength, and about the cruelty some women face, sometimes disguised as jokes." A small murmur ran through the audience, sensing something serious coming. She spoke of the days she had spent hiding her pain, the hospital visits no one knew about, the prayers whispered quietly in her home. She spoke of miscarriages, of hope rising and falling again, and of the public laughter that once turned her private struggles into entertainment. Every word was calm, every sentence precise. Then she shifted slightly. "Some years ago, certain assumptions were made about me," she said, eyes steady. "Assumptions that I had no children because of my body. Today, I want to set the record straight." She reached into her bag and held up a folder. Doctor's letters, dates, facts, all carefully documented, all irrefutable. She continued, voice clear. "Infertility is not always one person's burden. In my case, it was never mine alone. These documents show the truth. Doctors' reports, consultations, medical dates." Her words were simple, direct, and unshakable. The room froze. Phones lowered, conversations stopped. Some mouths fell open. Some faces paled. Even Sada's confident smile faltered, replaced by the flicker of panic that Ebony had waited years to see. No one spoke. No one laughed. No one moved. Ebony didn't shout. She didn't accuse. She didn't cry. She simply held up the truth, calm and undeniable, and let it speak for itself. In that moment, Ebony realized the power of silence transformed. It could no longer be a shield. Now it was a weapon of truth, precise, controlled, and impossible to ignore. The room was silent for a long moment after Ebony spoke. People were frozen, eyes wide, mouths slightly open. Sada's face went pale. For the first time, the woman who always controlled the room looked unsure, even small. She fiddled with her notes, cleared her throat, and tried to laugh it off, but no laughter came. Guests began whispering to each other, low voices full of surprise, confusion, and a little awe. Phones that had once recorded her jokes and Sada's public teasing now captured something completely different. The truth laid bare. Clips were already going viral in real time, but this time it wasn't entertainment. It was accountability. Sada's usual boldness faltered with each second. Her confident smiles vanished, replaced by nervous glances at those around her. She opened her mouth a few times to speak, but words wouldn't come. It was as if Ebony's calm, undeniable truth had stopped her completely. People stared at Ebony, and for a moment, she let the silence speak. She didn't need to shout. She didn't need to argue. She didn't need to insult. All that mattered was the truth, standing firm in the middle of a room that had once laughed at her pain. Finally, Ebony spoke again, softly but clearly. "Barren isn't a joke," she said, her voice steady, carrying through the room. "It's a wound." She paused, letting every word sink in. "A wound that doesn't need your laughter to hurt. A wound that deserves respect." She placed the microphone back gently and smiled once, this time a real smile. Calm, composed, untouchable. People nodded, some murmuring in agreement. Some dabbed at eyes that had started to water. The atmosphere had shifted completely. Sod looked down, swallowing hard. The room that had once cheered her boldness now felt the weight of her actions. No one laughed. No one teased. Phones still recorded, but this time the clips carried a lesson, a warning, and a reminder that cruelty has consequences. Ebony walked back to her seat, every step measured, every movement quiet but powerful. She had spoken, and nothing more was needed. The mocking had stopped. The laughter had ended. And in its place, respect, and perhaps a little fear, had begun. After the brunch, nothing in Ebony's family was quite the same. Sod stopped attending public events for a while, avoiding gatherings where cameras and attention were guaranteed. Her usual confidence had faded, replaced by quiet hesitation. People who once followed her every word now watched her carefully, unsure how she would act. The power balance had shifted, and everyone felt it. Cunnel approached Ebony a few days later. He looked tired, guilty, and sincere. "I should have spoken up that day," he said quietly, avoiding the usual excuses. "I'm sorry, Ebony. Truly." She listened, nodding slowly. She accepted the apology, not because it erased the past, but because it was honest. Forgiveness didn't mean forgetting. It meant understanding that some things could change only with truth and accountability. Ebony didn't gloat. She didn't celebrate Sada's discomfort or the awkwardness that now lingered at family events. She had no desire to humiliate anyone. Her goal was never revenge. It was respect, dignity, and finally being seen for who she really was. She began setting boundaries quietly but firmly. Invitations only if she wanted to attend. Conversations only if they were respectful. Visits only on her terms. People noticed, some adjusting, others grumbling quietly. But her calm determination left no room for manipulation. The same family who once whispered behind her back now had to approach her with honesty. Even relatives who had once pitted her began to treat her different. They stopped offering empty condolences or unsolicited advice about when the baby would come. They listened when she spoke, acknowledged her decisions, and recognized her contributions quietly made over the years. Respect replaced pity, and silence replaced cruelty. Ebony continued to live her life with the same quiet grace she always had, but now the rules were hers. Her strength was no longer invisible. She had endured humiliation, but she emerged with dignity intact, her boundaries clear, and her voice respected. And for the first time in a long time, family gatherings no longer carried the weight of expectation, judgment, or shame. They carried balance. They carried awareness. And most importantly, they carried the unspoken understanding that Ebony Adesina was no longer a woman anyone could mock, and she didn't need to raise her voice to prove it. Ebony's life had changed in ways no one could have predicted. The pain, the humiliation, the years of quiet struggle, they all led her to a place stronger than she had ever imagined. Now, she spent her days in Osogbo, mentoring young women who faced their own battles. Women who were told they were less because they hadn't married, hadn't had children, or hadn't followed the paths society expected. She taught them that womanhood was not defined by a womb, a husband, or public approval. She taught them strength, independence, and dignity. She showed them how to protect themselves, how to set boundaries, and how to rise quietly but powerfully when the world tried to put them down. The women listened to her stories, eyes wide, hearts inspired. They learned that silence could be a shield, but truth could be a weapon when used wisely. They learned that respect had to be earned, and cruelty had to be called out, not with anger, but with clarity and courage. And Ebony's story spread far beyond the classrooms and community halls. Her words were shared on social media, snippets of interviews, clips from speeches, all carrying the same quiet power she had always held. People admired her calm, her wisdom, her way of turning pain into lessons that others could live by. She never sought revenge, but the lesson was clear. The same family who once mocked her now knew the weight of their words. The viral line that everyone remembered captured it perfectly. "She called me barren in public, so I taught her what real emptiness looks like." Ebony smiled quietly as she watched her ments take their first steps toward confidence and self-respect. She knew she had become the kind of woman no one dared mock again, not because she shouted or fought, but because she stood firmly in her truth, and that truth could not be ignored.